Hello and welcome to Chapter 4 of Marketing 3340, Marketing Research, where we will talk about collecting secondary data from inside and outside the organization. If you recall, secondary data is data that is not collected by the company or by the researcher, but is data that has already been collected and has been researched and found to be applicable possibly to the research at hand. Poll question: internal secondary data, such as a firm's daily sales, are more important than external secondary data, such as a trade publication article. I guess I would sort of be in the middle. I'm not likely to disagree or strongly agree with this. It will all depend on how important the secondary data was. The internal secondary data, such as a firm's sales information, could be viable, just depending on what type of research is needed. But it would all depend on the situation. Well, both are important. I guess that's probably what you want to get from that question. Here are the learning objectives for the chapter, and we'll go over all of these. It's not a very long chapter, so this will be a fairly brief video, but we will hit on all 5 of these learning objectives. So what is the difference between secondary versus primary data? Well, secondary data is information that isn't gathered for the immediate study, but has been gathered for some other purpose, but is established somewhere, either through a journal or on the internet or somewhere where it can be accessed. It often gives good background information and fills in some of the gaps for researchers, whereas primary data is information that is collected specifically for the investigation at hand. And so it's very decision focused and tailored with the issue that is trying to be resolved. So if a company were to do a survey, if they were going to ask their customers which product they preferred, and they were conducting this research themselves, that would be primary data. Secondary data might be information from a survey that was conducted by another company, or a survey that was conducted years ago that might be sort of similar to what the company was for the information that they needed. But remember that secondary data is not gathered for the immediate study at hand. Okay, it's information that's out there that could be helpful, but it wasn't initially gathered for the study that the researcher or the company's conducting. So what are some advantages and disadvantages of secondary data? Well, the 2 primary advantages of secondary data is its time saving and money saving or cost saving. Because one, there's no research that has to be done. That research has already been conducted, so that saves the researcher a lot of time. It also saves them a lot of money because usually this information is available for a very minimal fee, if not for free. So the money savings is substantial. Disadvantages, though, include that the data doesn't often fit the problem that is the solutions that's being sought, and sometimes the information is not totally accurate, and sometimes we have to bear that in mind because we're not the original source of the information. So disadvantages: continue the problem of the fit. Maybe a different unit of measurement is used, or different class definitions. Maybe the information is too general, not specific enough. Maybe the information was collected a long time ago, so the age of the data is old, and therefore it may no longer be accurate. Problems with accuracy, obviously. It's not the primary source. The purpose of the publication and the general evidence of quality was unknown. So there's accuracy problems and fit problems with secondary data. And at the bottom, and I outlined this in red, hope you can see it, the most fundamental rule in using secondary data is to always use the primary source or the original source of secondary data. So don't let that confuse you. It simply means if you look something up on the internet, make sure that you're looking at the original information. In other words, don't take your information from a secondary source that is commenting on that data. So if you were looking, let's say you were looking for information on possibly the attitudes of consumers after the coronavirus. And you looked on the internet and you've seen a New York Times article that referenced a study. So that New York Times article is a secondary source of the primary source. In other words, you didn't look at the study, you read an article about the study. So you need to be aware of that. And so again, the fundamental rule in using that secondary data is that you're always using the primary source. So if you wanted that information, you would want to look up the study itself and not take the words from a media publication such as the New York Times that is simply paraphrasing or summarizing the information. Internal versus external data. So data that comes or originates from inside the company obviously is internal, and it comes usually from decision support systems, which we will talk about here in a minute. External data originates outside the organization. So this might be something from a report or a study that was researched. Most studies should begin with a search for internal data. So you want to try to find your answer or the information that you need internally before you go external for it, if that makes sense. Okay, so internal data, as we're going to see in a minute, is possibly sales data, statistics that the company keeps. And they keep this in what we call a database or a data system. And this is the data system is simply processes for capturing and storing data that is coming from within the company. So sales records, invoices, usually it's a lot of numbers that you're looking for and statistics. So this data system is put into a dialogue system along with a model system. And a model or analytical model basically says, how do we take this data from the data system and manipulate it so that it's readable? In other words, we might use analog systems, or we may use some type of logarithm to put the data in order for us so that we can make some sense of it. So perhaps I wanted to see how much sales volume did we capture from product 1A. Well, we go to our database, and our analytical model or model system would be able to pull up model 1A sales for a certain period of time. And that would allow us to explore this database, this user interface, and analyze the data that we're using from the model system. So it's really not that difficult. I may have made it sound a little bit more complex than it needs to be. But you have your database, you have your model systems, your data system and model system, and basically together they make a user interface, which is how we can dialogue, we can actually talk to the system and pull up the information that we need. It allows us to explore the database, and then it basically comes out as information. If you remember in the very first chapter, I said that data itself really isn't helpful. It has to be put into a form of information so that we can understand it and use it to make decisions. So a good decision support system is going to give us up-to-the-minute information and reports that we need on a day-to-day basis. So it could be sales and returns, It could be number of units produced, and so forth. And not only does it give us standard up-to-date minute information or data, the decision support system also can give us custom reports. So the managers can make really good decisions. They can go in and actually request exactly what they need. And so decision support systems in businesses are very important. And you'll find when you go out and work in the workplace that most companies have some type of data system or data decision support system. Data mining is, you've heard that term before probably, but this is how companies go in and find information that they need that's been that it's in their system, and they create computer algorithms to find exactly what they're looking for. And so if let's just say an automobile manufacturer might want to find out how many blue models of, or how popular a color was, blue, and they might go in and extrapolate the data so that they could find exactly the number of blue models that were sold over the past 10 years versus all the other colors. And that would be an example of data mining. Another example is Netflix. Netflix basically takes the information from the shows and movies that you watch on their streaming service and kicks that back with recommendations. So you'll notice that a lot of the shows that are recommended for you on Netflix are very similar to shows that you've already watched. External secondary data. And this is just more than going and Googling information. Although the internet has an abundance of information, there's lots of other areas and resources that need to be looked at or sought in order to get the information that a researcher is looking for. And the U.S. Census Bureau is an outstanding external secondary data source. Now, the last census was taken in 2010, and this actually is a census year. You probably have seen information about the census and how the Census Bureau is wanting you to make sure that you answer some census questions. But the census data is extremely valuable, and assignment 4.2 will give you a brief taste of the census data. All you have to do is answer a few questions. You'll see that in course content as you're completing the assignment. External secondary data, continuing, helps us profile customers through geodemographers, where they basically combine census data. Since the census is only taken every 10 years, there's usually a fairly large gap. Geodemographers, what they do is they basically fill in the gap through extrapolating statistics and give companies information that they need that's more up to date than the last census. And that's basically Chapter 4 of Marketing 3340. Please make sure that you complete the assignments, and at the end of that, once you're ready, complete the Chapter 3 and 4 quiz. I guess I'll say now, one thing you don't want to do is put off the quizzes, because take the quiz while it's fresh in your mind, while the information is fresh in your mind, and you'll actually do better on the quizzes if you do that. Have a great day, and I will talk to you in the next video. Take care.